Have you ever met the kind of neighbor who thinks they own the entire neighborhood? The type who's loud, acting like they're the general of a self-appointed army, bending everyone's life to their will. If not, let me tell you about myself and my sworn enemy, Lydia Bennett, the self-proclaimed queen of Sunny Hills, Austin, Texas. Lydia isn't just a nightmare with her high heels and haughty attitude. She's also the one who keeps parking on my lawn, ruining the lush pride I've sweated over to maintain. She thinks she can brazenly turn my property into her personal parking lot, without anyone daring to say a word. But I have a plan. A plan involving steel-hard concrete barriers. And trust me, when karma comes back to bite Lydia, it bites so hard she doesn't even have time to react. Before diving into the story, drop a comment about where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the latest videos. Sunny Hills isn't your average neighborhood. Tucked in the suburbs of Austin, Texas, where summer heat can melt tires, this community is run by an HOA, with rules so strict I have to get permission to plant a cactus in my yard. I'm a retired engineer with a passion for gardening, and I've lived here for years, turning my front lawn into a work of art. I'm not the type to pick fights. Honestly, I'd rather sit on my porch, sip coffee and admire my grass than argue with anyone. But then Lydia moved in, bringing her shiny Escalade and an ego bigger than the state of Texas, and everything started to flip upside down. While I was watching football in the living room, headlights swept across the window, an engine roared, and then an SUV plopped right onto the middle of my lawn. I got up, pulled the curtains, and saw deep tire tracks slicing through the grass I'd trimmed just that morning. The culprit, Lydia Bennett, who'd moved into the biggest house in the neighborhood a few days earlier. I frowned, telling myself maybe it was an accident. Maybe her garage wasn't cleared out yet. It didn't take long for Lydia to turn my lawn into her personal parking lot. She drove over my property line with the confidence of someone who thinks rules are for other people, not her. Sometimes she'd even leave trash behind, a soda can, a chip bag, like my lawn was her stress relief dumping ground after a long day. I started realizing this wasn't carelessness. It was a silent declaration of war. Lydia didn't just park there when the street was full. She did it even when the road in front of her house was completely empty, as if she wanted to send a message. I can do this, and you can't stop me. I'm not the kind of person who sits back and watches my property get trampled. I'd spent hours seeding, watering and pruning that lawn into a perfect green carpet. It's not just grass, it's my territory, something I take pride in within a neighborhood full of show-offs. Things escalated faster than I expected, and if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I might have thought I was imagining this nightmare. But no. It was real enough that I could hear the tires grinding into my lawn, feel every cut in the grass I'd nurtured like a father raising a child. Lydia wasn't just an annoying neighbor, she was a tornado of arrogance, and my lawn was the first victim on her long list of things to stomp over. The first time I caught Lydia red-handed was an early morning when the sun was just peeking over the Sunny Hills sky. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee when I heard an engine roar from the street. I glanced out the window and nearly dropped my mug on the floor. Lydia's gleaming Escalade, silver and sparkling like it had just been polished, was slowly backing out of her garage. But instead of keeping the wheels on her perfectly paved driveway, she drove straight over the property line, plunking down onto my lawn like it was a public parking space. Deep tire tracks slashed through the grass, and I swear I saw a piece of paper fall from her car window, probably a Starbucks receipt she just chugged on her way back. I stood there, jaw dropped, watching Lydia step out of the car. She was wearing an expensive yoga outfit, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, and didn't even glance at the lawn groaning under her SUV's weight. Without hesitation, without a flicker of doubt, she locked the car, spun on her heel, and strutted into her house like she'd just pulled off a grand victory. I felt the blood rush to my head. I'm not a hothead, but the way Lydia acted like my property was an extension of her domain made me want to smash something. Still, I took a deep breath and told myself to stay calm. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe this was just a one-off. That maybe vanished fast. A few days later, while I was watering the lawn in the afternoon, Lydia showed up again. This time, she drove in from the opposite direction, clearly coming back from somewhere, and without a second thought, she sent her Escalade barreling over the boundary, parking smack in the middle of my lawn. The sound of the grass being crushed rang out like a lament, and I couldn't take it anymore. I turned off the hose, marched across the street, and knocked on her door. Lydia opened it, phone glued to her ear, not even bothering to look at me. "Lydia," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, "you just parked on my lawn." She finally looked up, but only to adjust her sunglasses with a smug smirk. "Oh, that patch of grass," she said, her tone flat, like she was talking about the weather. "It's right in my way out. You should move it." I blinked, unable to believe my ears. "Move it?" I repeated. "It's my lawn. On my land. You know that's private property, right? Lydia sighed, clearly annoyed at having to talk to someone who wasn't the center of her universe. If you didn't put it so close to the street, I wouldn't have to park on it. She shot back, adding a mocking smile. Besides, your grass is ugly anyway. I'm making it look better. I clenched my teeth, trying not to let my anger explode. I wanted to snap back with something sharp, but I knew arguing with Lydia was like arguing with a concrete wall, pointless and exhausting. I'm just asking you to be careful, I said, my voice tightening. It's not cheap to fix. Lydia laughed, a fake cackle echoing through the air. Oh, you can afford it, she said, waving her hand like she was shooing a fly. Besides, I'm doing you a favor. It looks less tacky with tire marks. With that, she turned and slammed the door, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, staring at my wrecked lawn. I knew I couldn't just stand by and watch her turn my property into her personal parking lot forever. But I didn't want to turn this into an all-out war in Sunny Hills either. So like any rational man, I decided to try resolving things peacefully, before resorting to stronger measures. At first I went with something simple. I put up a small neat sign right at the lawn's boundary, clearly stating, "No parking" in black letters on a white background. I even picked a friendly-looking sign, nothing too harsh, hoping Lydia would get the hint without needing more words. But the next morning, when I stepped outside with my usual coffee, I saw the sign lying on the ground, crumpled like someone had run it over. And of course, Lydia's Escalade was parked squarely on my lawn, its tires crushing the spot I just reseeded the day before. I sighed, picked up the sign, and told myself maybe I needed to talk to her again. Surely there was some shred of decency buried under Lydia's arrogant shell, right? The second confrontation happened that afternoon. While she was out in her yard watering some wilted plants she called decorations, I crossed the street, hands in my pockets to stay casual, and spoke up. "Lydia, I really need you to stop parking on my lawn." She didn't even look up, just kept spraying water like I was an annoying fly buzzing around. "We've already talked about this," she said, her voice bored like she was reciting an old script. I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Yeah, and you're still doing it. It's on my land. Just park on the street or in your garage." Lydia finally turned around, but only to roll her eyes dramatically. "If your lawn wasn't right in my exit path, I wouldn't have to park on it," she said, shrugging like it was my fault for buying a house there. I blinked, trying to process her twisted logic. "It's not your exit path," I stressed. "It's my property. Just keep your car on the street, and there's no issue." Lydia smirked, that familiar mocking grin creeping back. "Not my fault if it's in my blind spot," she replied, then turned away like the conversation was over. Blind spot? I wondered if she was serious, or if this was just another lame excuse to dodge responsibility. Failing to reason with Lydia, I decided to try the Sunny Hills HOA. I figured if anyone could do something, it'd be them. The ones always preaching about keeping the neighborhood harmonious. I went to the monthly meeting and stood in front of Chairman Victor Ramsey, an older guy with silver hair and a tired attitude, like he'd rather watch paint dry than hear complaints. "Victor," I started, keeping my tone even. "Lydia Bennett keeps parking on my lawn. It's ruining everything, and I just want her to stop." Victor rubbed his temples, looking at me like I'd interrupted his nap. "Ethan, we can't control how people park," he said, his voice monotone. "Maybe you should consider trimming your lawn back so it's less in the way." I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my anger in check. "Trim it back," I repeated. "It's on my land, not public property. Why is this my problem?" Victor sighed theatrically, like I was a kid who wouldn't get it. "We have to maintain peace in the neighborhood," he said, shrugging. "Compromise. Ethan, it's just a lawn." I stared at him, dumbfounded. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you're not going to do anything?" I asked, my voice tense. Victor gave a forced smile, lips pressed tight. "I'm afraid we're done discussing this," he said, signaling the meeting's end. I walked out of there, hands still clenched, feeling like I'd just been slapped in the face. I'd tried my best to handle the Lydia issue civilly, putting up a sign, talking face to face, even humbling myself to beg Victor Ramsey and the HOA council for help. But instead of support, I got a shrug and a compromise, suggestion I couldn't wrap my head around. I'd hoped the HOA, with all its ridiculous rules about fence heights and window paint colors, would take some responsibility for protecting my property. But no, they sided with Lydia, and things only got worse from there. A few days after the meeting, I found a letter in my mailbox, printed on official Sunny Hills HOA letterhead. For a naive moment, I thought maybe they'd reconsidered. Maybe they'd decided to address Lydia's destructive parking habits. But when I opened the envelope, My heart sank. The letter wasn't a warning for Lydia. It was for me. Dear Mr. Harper, it began in a dry tone. We've noticed your lawn may pose a traffic hazard for vehicles in the neighborhood. We suggest you reconsider maintaining it in its current location. I read it over and over, unable to believe my eyes. Traffic hazard. My lawn was fully within my private property lines, a clear distance from the public road. Meanwhile, Lydia kept parking her Escalade on it, like it was her personal lot, and I was the one getting warned. I gripped the letter tight, staring out at my ravaged lawn. Lydia's tire tracks were now permanent scars, and one corner of the grass had died completely from being crushed too many times. Anger boiled inside me, but I still wanted to give this one last shot at being resolved the right way. I set up a small security camera, a cheap one from the local electronics store, aimed straight at the lawn. If the HOA wouldn't take my word for it, at least I'd have proof that Lydia wasn't just accidentally parking in the wrong spot. She was doing it on purpose, as a power play, and I caught her in the act again. One morning as I sat by the window with my coffee, I saw Lydia drive up. Her shiny Escalade backed out of her garage, but instead of parking on the wide open street in front of her house, she deliberately veered right, rolling her tires over the boundary and onto my lawn. The sound of the grass being crushed echoed through the open window, and I saw it clear as day on the camera screen. Lydia didn't just park, she backed up and rolled forward a few times, like she wanted to make sure no blade survived. What infuriated me most was how she glanced toward my house afterward, smirking like she knew I was watching, and powerless to stop her. She stepped out, jingling her keys, then disappeared inside, leaving me with a lawn that looked like it had been run over by a steamroller. I reviewed the footage, my hands trembling with anger. I had no doubts left. This wasn't carelessness, or a blind spot like Lydia had once claimed. This was deliberate, a test to see how long I'd hold out before breaking. I decided to confront her again, hoping the evidence would make her back off. I printed a still from the camera, crossed the street, and knocked on Lydia's door. When she opened it, still with her phone glued to her ear, I held up the photo. "Lydia," I said, my voice firm. "This is proof you're intentionally parking on my lawn. It has to stop." Lydia glanced at the picture, then flicked her hand like she was shooing an annoying bug. "Calm down," she said, her tone flat. "It's just a lawn. If you're dumb enough to leave it there, that's not my problem." I clenched my teeth, feeling like my head might explode. "It's my property," I growled. "You're damaging it." Lydia laughed, a shrill cackle that made me want to punch a wall. "So what?" she shot back, shrugging. "Go ahead and complain, but I don't care." I'd tried my hardest to keep the peace in Sunny Hills, but after that absurd HOA warning letter and Lydia Bennett's arrogance, I started feeling like a boxer backed into a corner without gloves. I'd put up signs, talked to her, begged to counsel, all for nothing. But what happened next wasn't just a punch to my face, it was an open declaration of war, and Lydia clearly had no intention of stopping until me or my lawn surrendered completely. Things became clearer after my last confrontation with Lydia. I'd thought the security footage, showing her deliberately backing over my lawn, would make her hesitate, or at least rethink her actions. But no, Lydia seemed to take it as an invitation to a game she was sure she'd win. A few days later, I was sitting in the living room when I heard an engine roar from the street. I stood up, pulled the curtains, and nearly dropped my coffee when I saw a huge delivery truck, the kind used for hauling furniture, parked smack in the middle of my lawn. The driver stepped out, looking around like he wasn't sure where he was, then knocked on Lydia's door. I checked the camera, and saw her come out, pointing at the truck, clearly the one who'd told it to park there. She even stood there for a moment, hands on her hips, smirking toward my house like she was saying, "See, I can do this." I felt the blood rush to my head, but I still wanted to give her a chance to explain. I stepped outside, hands in my pockets to stay calm, and called across the street. "Lydia, can you tell the driver to move the truck off my lawn?" She turned, adjusting her sunglasses with that familiar bored look. "Oh, you're getting sensitive about that grass again," she replied, her tone flat. "They need a spot to unload." "What, you want me to tell them to park in the middle of the street?" I gritted my teeth. "It's on my land," I said, pointing at the crushed lawn. "You've got the whole street in your garage." Lydia laughed, her shrill cackle cutting through Sunny Hill's quiet air. "If you don't like it, go tell them yourself," she said, then turned back inside, leaving me standing there with the truck still on my lawn. But that wasn't all. That weekend Lydia threw a big party, probably to watch the Super Bowl or show off to her rich friends. I looked out the window and saw not just her Escalade, but a whole line of guest cars parked across my lawn. Tire tracks overlapped, the grass was mashed into a muddy mess, and a few beer cans rolled around like trophies from a battle I wasn't invited to. I checked the camera footage, and this time, I saw Lydia standing in her yard, directing each car onto my lawn, with the confidence of a Hollywood director. She even glanced back at my house, smirking like before, as if making sure I saw it all. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside, phone in hand with the latest video, and yelled across the street, "Lydia, you need to stop this right now." She turned, holding a cocktail, and waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. "Calm down," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's just a lawn. You're making too big a deal out of it." I held up the phone, pointing at the screen. "I've got proof you're doing this on purpose." I growled, "You're wrecking my property." Lydia glanced at the video, then shrugged with that smug grin. "If you're stupid enough to keep grass there, that's your problem, not mine," she replied, then laughed like she'd just told the world's best joke. After that, she turned back to her party, leaving me standing there, hands shaking with rage. The breaking point came the next morning when I went out to check the damage. Not only was my lawn trashed, now looking like a swamp, but Lydia had driven her Escalade over it again before leaving, flattening the last untouched corner completely. After months of Lydia turning my lawn into her personal parking lot, from deliberate backups to the delivery truck and the party cars, I was done playing nice. She'd mocked me, the HOA had abandoned me, and my once proud lawn now looked like a mud pit even a Texas cow wouldn't bother with. If Lydia wanted to make my lawn the arena for her power trip, I'd make her lose, spectacularly. And my weapon, small concrete barriers, but not the ordinary kind. These were the kind that make even her shiny Escalade scream. The idea hit me one night, after watching the camera footage for the 10th time, seeing Lydia wave smugly after crushing my lawn's last corner. I sat on the couch, gripping my phone, and told myself it was time to change the game. I didn't just want to protect my lawn. I wanted Lydia to face the consequences of her arrogance. I opened my laptop and searched online for toughest yard barriers. I scrolled through dozens of articles about wooden fences, plastic stakes, and cheap decorations I knew Lydia would flatten in a heartbeat. But then I founded industrial concrete barriers, the compact kind used to mark parking lot boundaries or shield fire hydrants. They weren't just tough, they were built to take vehicle impacts without a scratch. I smiled for the first time in weeks. These weren't ordinary barriers. They were silent warriors, hard enough to break a car bumper while looking harmless as garden decor. But I needed them to be HOA legal. Otherwise, Victor Ramsey and the council would jump in to blame me again. I read the Sunny Hills rules carefully. Yard decorations are allowed as long as they don't extend past property lines or obstruct public traffic. Perfect. I'd placed them right on my property line, painted earthy brown to look like regular wooden fencing. Lydia would never suspect a thing, until it was too late. The next day I drove to a building supply store on the outskirts of Austin. I walked in, the smell of cement and fresh wood hitting my nose, and headed straight for the barrier section. An employee named Carl, wearing a dusty apron, helped me pick out precast concrete ones, about a foot tall, 6 inches wide, heavy enough not to budge, but small enough to go unnoticed. "These can handle small trucks," Carl said, winking. "What are you using them for?" I gave a faint smile. "Protecting my lawn from a vandal," I replied. Carl nodded like he'd heard that story 100 times, but I didn't stop it off the shelf. I wanted to ensure these barriers wouldn't move an inch, even if Lydia rammed them on purpose. I called Ben, an old friend who'd been a construction engineer, and asked for help. He showed up at my place that weekend, with a bag of cement, some rebar, and a curious grin. "You building a fortress or what?" Ben joked as I explained the plan. "No," I said, pointing at my wrecked lawn. "I'm teaching an arrogant jerk what boundaries mean." Ben laughed, and we got to work. We dug small holes along the line between my property and Lydia's, each about a foot deep. I mixed cement in an old bucket while Ben cut rebar for reinforcement. We set each concrete barrier into a hole, poured cement around it, and drove rebar down to anchor them like rock. I worked late into the night, sweat soaking my shirt under the Texas heat, but I didn't care. Every time I set a barrier in place, I pictured Lydia's smug face when she realized she couldn't win this time. When we finished, I painted them earthy brown and let them dry overnight. The next morning, I stood on my porch, looking at the new barriers. They looked like ordinary garden edging, but inside were unbreakable concrete blocks. That morning started like any other. Texas sun shining over Sunny Hills rooftops, the quiet broken only by birds chirping and a distant lawnmower. I stood on the porch, glancing across the street, waiting to see if Lydia would keep up her destruction game. I didn't have to wait long. An engine roared from her side, and her shiny Escalade backed out of the garage with the speed of someone who thinks the world has to move for them. I gripped my coffee mug tighter, my heart beating a little faster. Lydia, in her usual yoga gear and oversized sunglasses, drove with that arrogant confidence I knew too well. And then, like every time before, she veered right, aiming straight for my lawn. But this time it was different. The Escalade charged in at its usual angle, the front right tire crossing my property line. And then boom, a deafening crash rang out. Not the soft squish of crushed grass, but the sound of metal hitting rock-hard concrete. Her car lurched, the front tire popping up like it had hit a curb at high speed. A screeching scrape tore through the air as the SUV's front bumper grated against the barrier, and I saw it clear as day through the window. Her car tilted to one side, shuddering from the impact. I smirked, satisfaction spreading through me. No more grass crying out, just the sound of Lydia's defeat echoing around. For a few seconds everything went quiet, then the car door flew open, and Lydia stepped out, her face red with fury and confusion. She glared at the Escalade, now tilted with a shattered front bumper, a flat tire, and an obviously busted front axle. I stood on the porch sipping my coffee, fighting back the grin threatening to split my face. Lydia kicked the broken bumper piece, like that'd fix it, then spun toward me with eyes that could shoot fire. "What the hell was that?" she screamed, her voice piercing through sunny hills. I shrugged, keeping my face calm like it was no big deal. "Morning, Lydia," I called back, voice light. "Looks like you hit something." Lydia practically charged across the street, her sneakers pounding the pavement, face flushed like an overripe tomato. "What did you do to your lawn?" she roared, jabbing a finger at the concrete barriers still standing strong, not a scratch on them. I took another slow sip of coffee, savoring the moment. "Me?" I said, feigning surprise. "Nothing. Looks like you ran into my barriers." Lydia's eyes bulged, darting from me to the barriers and back. "Barriers?" she shrieked. "What the hell are those things?" I tilted my head, keeping the innocent look I'd rehearsed in my head all night. "Just decorative fencing," I replied, voice even. "I put them up to protect my lawn, since you kept parking on it. You told me to handle it myself, right?" Lydia's jaw dropped, her brain seemingly short-circuiting as she processed what was happening. "You can't do that," she yelled, flailing her arms like a tantruming kid. I raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" I asked. "They're on my land. HOA rules allow yard decorations, as long as they're within boundaries." I double-checked. Lydia's face went from red to purple, and for a moment, I swear I saw steam coming out of her ears. She spun back to the Escalade, now looking like a wounded animal slumped on my lawn. The front bumper was smashed, plastic bits scattered everywhere, the tire completely flat, and the axle visibly bent through the chassis. She kicked the tire again, then yanked out her phone, hands shaking. "I'm calling the HOA," she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "You'll pay for this, you jerk." I shrugged, taking another sip of coffee. "Go ahead," I said, cool as ever, "but I'd call a tow truck first. Your car doesn't look too good." Lydia stood there, panting, staring at her beloved car, the thing she cherished more than her Sunny Hills queen reputation, now reduced to a heap of wreckage. I could see the panic in her eyes, as she realized her predicament. If she called the HOA, she'd have to explain why she rammed into my property, and with my security camera, which I double-checked to ensure it captured everything, she couldn't deny a thing. I sat in the living room, sipping the last of my morning coffee, still basking in the victory of watching Lydia Bennett's Escalade shatter against my concrete barriers. The sound of metal crunching and her panicked face, as she realized she'd lost, were the best morale boost I'd had in months. But I knew Lydia wasn't the type to give up easily. She was too arrogant to accept defeat without retaliation. And sure enough, she didn't keep me waiting long. Just a few hours after the tow truck hauled away the wreckage that was once her SUV, Lydia launched her counterattack. But this time, I was ready to turn it into her final self-inflicted blow. Lydia's first reaction was a dramatic performance the whole Sunny Hills neighborhood could hear. After screaming threats about calling the HOA, she stormed back to her house, still clutching her phone, and started making calls. I watched through the window as she paced her yard, her shrill voice echoing through the quiet air. "I need a tow truck right now," she yelled at someone on the other end. "No, I don't know what happened. No, it's not my fault." I smirked, shaking my head. "Sure, Lydia," I muttered to myself. "Keep deluding yourself." The tow truck arrived within an hour, and when the driver, a burly guy with a curious grin, checked out the Escalade, he just whistled. "Man," he said, crouching to look at the busted bumper and bent axle. "What'd you hit to do this much damage?" "A wall." Lydia glared toward my house, snarling. "A trap." "That's what I hit." I knew her next move would be running to the Sunny Hills HOA, and I wasn't about to let her turn the tables. Before she could even step out of her house, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and sent an email to the entire HOA council from Victor Ramsey down to the smallest member. I attached the security footage, crystal clear proof of Lydia deliberately parking on my lawn for months, from random backups to the delivery truck and the party cars. I added a short note. This is why I put up the barriers to protect my property. Everything's within my land and HOA rules. I hit send, then leaned back, waiting to watch Lydia dig her own grave. Lydia, oblivious to my move, stormed straight to the HOA office like a hurricane. She burst in, hair a mess from rage, and launched into a victim act she'd surely rehearsed in front of a mirror 100 times. I need to file a complaint right now, she declared, her voice trembling with anger. Victor Ramsey, who usually bowed to her like a loyal lackey, looked up from his desk with a weary expression. Lydia, what now? He asked, rubbing his temples. Ethan Harper set a trap on his lawn to wreck my car. She screamed, pointing at the door like I was standing there. Front bumpers smashed, axles broken, and I'm out thousands to fix it. You have to do something. But the room's vibe wasn't what Lydia expected. No one nodded along or jumped to her defense like usual. Instead, the council members sat quietly, some avoiding her gaze, others glaring at her with obvious irritation. On the table I spotted printouts of my email, with stills from the camera footage scattered like evidence at a crime scene. Victor raised a hand, cutting off Lydia's monologue. Lydia, he said, his voice unusually cold. Before you say more, do you know what you've done? Lydia blinked, caught off guard. Done what? She repeated, her voice shrill. I'm the victim here. He wrecked my car. Victor sighed, picking up the stack of papers. We have footage showing you repeatedly parking on Ethan's property, on purpose, not by accident, he said, his tone firm. You've been trashing his lawn for months. Another member, Clara, who usually stayed quiet in meetings, spoke up. You even told the delivery truck to park there. We saw it all. Lydia's jaw dropped, her face going pale. That's not, she stammered. But Clara held up a hand to stop her. Don't deny it, she said, flipping through the photos. You did this, and now you want us to fix it for you. Victor slapped a file down on the table, his eyes sharp. You violated property boundaries and damaged someone else's land, he said. Ethan had every right to put barriers on his property. You crashed into them, and that's on you. Lydia froze, gripping the table's edge. You have to do something, she yelled. He can't get away with this. Victor shook his head. We will do something, he said, calm as ever. You're getting a $6,000 fine for property damage and reckless behavior in the neighborhood. And don't think about appealing. We've got enough evidence to take this to court if we have to. Lydia stood there, pale and speechless. She'd walked into that meeting hoping to paint me as the villain. But now she was the one exposed in front of the whole council. Meanwhile, I sat at home, rewatching the footage again, smiling as I pictured her face right then. She tried to strike back, but instead of taking me down, she'd run headfirst into her own net. I sat on my porch, coffee mug in hand, looking out at my still muddy but now peaceful lawn. After Lydia Bennett smashed her Escalade into my concrete barriers, and got called out by the Sunny Hills HOA Council, I felt like I'd just woken up from a long nightmare. But my victory didn't stop at making Lydia pay a $6,000 fine or watching her lose it in front of the neighborhood. No, Lydia's fate got way worse than that, and all I had to do was sit back, sip my coffee, and watch her dig herself deeper. The fall of the Sunny Hills Queen was fast, public, and satisfying beyond anything I could have dreamed. After her disastrous HOA meeting, Lydia slunk back home with a face twisted like she'd been slapped with a rotten fish. I heard bits and pieces from Martha, the gossipy old neighbor, that Lydia had tried yelling in the HOA office, blaming everyone from Victor Ramsey to the mailman for not stopping me from setting up the barriers. But no one listened anymore. Victor, who'd once groveled to her like a lackey, now turned to protect the HOA's reputation. He declared the council wouldn't tolerate property damage, and the $6,000 fine was just the start. Lydia, with an ego bigger than Texas, refused to pay right away, screaming she'd sue them back. But she didn't know I'd sent the footage to the council, and no lawyer would touch her case when she was so obviously in the wrong. Then came the Escalade saga. Lydia loved that car more than her own reputation, but after slamming into my concrete barriers, it was a pitiful pile of scrap. The tow truck took it to a garage outside Austin, and I heard from Tom, a neutral neighbor who usually stayed out of trouble, that the mechanic quoted thousands to fix it. New bumper, new axle, and a bunch of other parts the insurance wouldn't cover. When Lydia called her insurance company, hoping they'd bail her out of the debt, she got another reality slap. They'd seen my camera footage, which I happily sent when they asked, and ruled she'd intentionally hit someone else's property. Intentional acts aren't covered, the agent said over the phone, and Lydia just screamed helplessly before hanging up. No insurance, no car, and a $6,000 fine hanging over her head. Lydia started losing the queenly glow she'd crowned herself with. The Sunny Hills neighbors, who'd once grudgingly put up with her to avoid hassle, now openly shunned her. Martha told me she'd seen Lydia try chatting up a few people on the street, but they brushed her off, whispering about that woman who wrecked her car on my grass. Tom, usually quiet, even chuckled as he passed her house, telling me, "She trashed my yard once too, but I never dared do anything. You're a hero." I just shrugged, but inside, I felt a small thrill as the neighborhood started seeing me differently. Lydia didn't give up right away. She tried filing a counter-complaint against me, accusing me of setting a dangerous trap to hurt her, but the HOA laughed it off and tossed her claim in the trash. Victor, now determined to clean up the council's image, after years of Lydia's manipulation, issued a new parking rule notice, demanding respect for property lines. Lydia, with no allies left, became the neighborhood joke. Martha said some folks started calling her queen of the wreck behind her back, and every time she stepped outside that haughty glint in her eyes seemed to fade a little more. The peak of her downfall hit when I looked out my window one morning, and saw a for sale sign staked in Lydia's front yard. I nearly spat out my coffee in shock. Lydia Bennett, who treated Sunny Hills like her kingdom, was running away. I watched her move out from a distance, seeing her snap at movers as she tossed stuff into a rental truck, since the Escalade was still in the shop, and yell about delays. The house went up for sale way below market value, probably because Lydia's reputation had tanked the neighborhood's appeal to buyers. On her last day, after loading the truck, she shot one final glance at my house. I stepped onto the porch, raised my coffee mug in a mock toast, and grinned wide. Lydia gritted her teeth but said nothing, just turned and drove off, leaving Sunny Hills for good. Lydia was gone, taking her rental truck full of stuff and her shattered ego, leaving behind a pleasant void in the neighborhood no one expected. My lawn was still muddy, scarred from her tire tracks, but now it was a free lawn, no longer threatened by her shiny Escalade or her self-proclaimed queen arrogance. I sipped my coffee, eyeing the small concrete barriers standing tall like loyal sentinels, and smiled. Sometimes, justice doesn't need fists or shouts, just a bit of smarts and a few well-placed concrete blocks. The day after Lydia left, I got to work fixing my lawn. I bought new grass seed, the best fertilizer from the local store, and spent the afternoon kneeling in the dirt, planting each seed with an artist's care. I even added a row of wild flowers along the concrete barriers, both for beauty and as a warning to anyone dumb enough to think about parking on my land, that they'd be in for trouble. When I stood up brushing dirt off my hands, I looked out at the neighborhood and noticed something strange. Sunny Hills seemed to breathe easier. No more engine roars shattering the morning quiet, no more Lydia's yells echoing from her yard, just birds chirping and a soft breeze through the trees, a symphony I hadn't realized I'd missed until now. The neighbors started noticing the shift too. Martha, who'd gossiped about Lydia with undisguised glee, crossed the street with a plate of fresh-baked cookies. "Ethan, you did what none of us dared," she said, winking. "You got rid of that witch without getting your hands dirty." I laughed, taking the cookies. "Just put up some barriers, Martha," I replied. She tripped herself. Martha cackled, patting my shoulder. "Too humble. The whole neighborhood's talking about you. We're even thinking of throwing a Lydia-free Sunny Hills party." I raised an eyebrow, unsure if she was joking, but the idea made me chuckle. And Martha wasn't kidding. That weekend, neighbors gathered at the little park down the street, bringing BBQ beer and a homemade banner that read "Goodbye Lydia. Hello Peace." They invited me as the guest of honor, though I just wanted to hang back and eat a chicken leg in quiet. But Tom, who'd once been too scared of Lydia to speak up, dragged me into the crowd. "You're our hero," he said, raising a beer. I thought no one could take her down. I shrugged, lifting my coffee mug. Never breaking that habit, even at a party. "She took herself down," I said. "I just pointed karma the right way." The Sunny Hills HOA changed after Lydia's exit too. Victor Ramsey, maybe ashamed of letting her run the council for so long, cracked down on parking rules and enforced them fairly. No more nonsense warning letters for me. Instead, they sent a general notice stressing that private property must be respected. I heard from Martha that Victor dug into the HOA's finances and found Lydia had used funds to plant those dead potted plants in her yard. An audit kicked off, and though she was gone, I wouldn't be surprised if she soon got a bill from the HOA's lawyer. My win wasn't just about the lawn. I'd become a mini legend in Sunny Hills. Neighbors who'd never talked to me before now waved every morning, some even asking for tips on protecting their own yards. "I need some barriers like yours," a guy named Dave joked as he passed by, "in case Lydia comes back." I laughed, shaking my head. But I knew she wouldn't. Her house sold cheap to a young family new to the area, who per Martha were nice folks with no plans to park on anyone's grass. One morning, as my lawn started greening up again, I stood on the porch, watching the concrete barriers now framed by blooming wildflowers. I sipped my coffee, letting the quiet sink into every breath. I thought about this journey, from the days fuming over Lydia's tire marks, to the nights pouring concrete, to that final moment she drove away forever. I didn't need to yell or fight to win. I just needed patience, brains, and a touch of creativity. Lydia brought herself down, and I was just the guy who set the last stone for her to trip over. Sometimes karma doesn't come on its own. It needs someone like me to nudge it along, and when it hits, oh, it's sweet. My lawn would soon be back, but this victory, over Lydia Bennett, would stick with me forever. I set my mug down, glanced at the barriers one more time and whispered, "Thanks, little soldiers." Then I walked inside, knowing Sunny Hills was mine now, and pieces too. The story HOA Karen keeps parking on my lawn grass, so I got some concrete barriers reflects a very real slice of life in the US today, especially in suburban spots like Sunny Hills, where HOAs and neighbor dynamics can turn into petty battlegrounds over arrogance and ownership. In today's world where individual rights and private property are prized but also easily trampled by folks like Lydia Bennett, a stand-in for the classic American Karen who thinks she runs everything, my tale offers a deep lesson on handling conflict without losing your cool. From Lydia's constant parking on my lawn wrecking my personal pride to her public taunts with delivery trucks and parties, it's a familiar reality. Disrespect for personal boundaries still thrives in American society, especially when backed by groups like HOAs, often slammed for bias or bureaucracy. The takeaway here isn't just patience, it's blending smart strategy with rule following, which fits America's culture where law and property rights are bedrock. I didn't scream at Lydia or trash her car. I set up legal concrete barriers, recorded proof with cameras, and let her screw herself, costing her a car, a $6,000 fine, and ultimately her spot in the neighborhood. It teaches us that in real-life America today, when facing Lydias out there, maybe an arrogant coworker, a nuisance neighbor, or someone abusing power, don't rush to snap. Learn from me, know your rights like I check the HOA rules, prep thoroughly barriers and footage, and let their behavior expose them. Life in the US rewards those who play by the rules and use savvy to turn setbacks into wins, like how I turned a muddy lawn into a symbol of grit, ending up with peace, coffee, and neighbors' respect. Stay calm, plan it out, and let karma, with a little help from you, handle the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next neighborhood drama. Thanks for watching my story. See you in the next video, with more surprises from Sunny Hills.